know you heard me on the radio. Flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K. I know you heard me on the radio. Flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K.
Rutgers Scarlet Knights fans, Night Watch listeners, we spend months after Joe Harris-Simiak decides to go take a head coaching job, after the teardown and rebuild of the defense this year, after several effective seasons on the banks. Harris-Simiak leaves. That was an excellent hire by Coach Schiano, taking him away from Minnesota and PJ Fleck. And we're waiting. We're waiting to see who is going to be the defensive coordinator of Rutgers. And you're looking at Tem Lukabu. You're looking at maybe Campanelli, who wound up in Jacksonville. You're wondering. If it's taken this long, it's got to be somebody in the NFL. If it's taken this long, it's got to be somebody where we're shooting high. Waiting on bated breath, and we get the news yesterday. Zach Sparber, a position coach for James Madison, is going to be the co-defensive coordinator. And a lot of buzz about that, not a lot of experience. Jersey ties, young guy, no prior play calling experience. There's got to be another shoe that's going to drop. Who could it be? Somebody internally, Schiano himself. Is it going to be somebody else, a big name that we are excited about from another place? The news comes out today, guys, and it's Rob Smith. Rob Smith, former Rutgers defensive coordinator from just a few years ago. The guy just before Harris-Simiak is back again. We have split up terms. What is this, the presidential race? And don't get me started on all that. Part of the reason I really haven't been back for the last loss of Rutgers basketball. There's a lot going on in the world, man. And there's a lot going on beyond Rutgers sports. So, I'm a little occupied with some things. But what do we think about this situation? So, first of all, Zach Sparber, there were rumors, first of all, that he was a finalist for the JMU defensive coordinator job. So it's not like he's not a sought-after, young, up-and-coming commodity. Played ball at Bergen Catholic. And look, by most accounts, what you can hear, and you can hear about it from a lot of the other guys who are plugged in, obviously Richie O'Leary, these guys. Sparber is an effective recruiter. He's got the chops to be a good recruiter. We've seen guys come in and become good recruiters, especially up-and-coming guys. Schiano does have an eye for talent. Most of the guys that he's come up and fostered through his program and fostered through things have wound up being effective coaches elsewhere. So maybe he sees something in Sparber that can spark things. Rob Smith, we know his history, right? Rob Smith was the special teams coach for Rutgers in the late 00s. And then up until 2012, he became the defensive coordinator. Went to Tampa to join Schiano after that 2012 season. And let's face it, when Rob Smith was the special teams coach at Rutgers from 2009 through 2011, he was a very effective special teams coach. Rutgers led the college football in those years. I mean, that was when Rutgers was really known as an ace team at blocking kicks, blocking punts. Special teams was a pivotal part of Rutgers football, and we were effective at it a lot. We finished second in block punts in 2011. We had punt and kick returns for touchdowns. We ranked 5th nationally in punt and kickoff returns combined during Smith's tenure as special teams coach. We were 1st nationally in block kicks total with 31. And so Rob Smith has always been somebody who was recognized as a very good special teams coach for Rutgers. In 2012, that was a heck of a year. That was a year that Rutgers got a share of the Big East title. Obviously, an infamous game to end the season versus Louisville on a Thursday night at High Point Solutions. I don't know what it was at the time. I was there front and center. And it was a disappointing loss because, we were on a trajectory where it looked like we really were going to come away with the conference title solo for the first time ever. And if I recall, I think it was UConn. Could have been Pitt. I think it was UConn. I don't remember. Somebody tell me in the comments, where we just took a drubbing after a big win. And it set up the Louisville matchup, where we lose. Remember there was the fake field goal for a touchdown called back for ineligible man downfield, and Teddy Bridgewater comes in and on a hobbled leg winds up beating us. Ill-advised stuff down the stretch there. I think that might have been when Tim Wright dropped the pass. I don't want to relive negative things that have nothing to do with Rob Smith, but I'm just saying, that year the defense was pretty good. Steve Baharnis, I think, was on the team. Good team. And so it's not like Rob Smith doesn't have some positive storied history with Rutgers and with Rutgers football that you can look on positively. He went to Tampa Bay in 2013. He did coach Levante David at that time to being a first-team All-Pro. Levante David, obviously a linebacker for the Bucks at that time, was a former Nebraska player. Went to coach at Arkansas with Brett Bielema, and he didn't last very long there. They were successful that year. He eventually wound up at Minnesota. PJ Fleck brought him on, and he was there for a little bit, but he was dismissed pretty early. Comes back to Rutgers in 2020 when Schiano rejoins the Scarlet Knights. I remember when he was hired, there was some fanfare. I was somebody who was, not necessarily over the moon excited, but I did think, look, it's a recognizable name. It's a guy that I have fond memories of from when he was here. Schiano's comfortable with him. I didn't recall as much of him being the defensive coordinator as I recalled him being the special teams coach, but those memories were warm and fuzzy at the time. I was excited about Schiano coming back in general, and I was happy to see him return. But after a few short seasons, his contract was not renewed by Coach Schiano in 2021. Obviously, we go on, we make a great hire, and Rob Smith moves on to Duke. And the guys on the night report were talking about, search your phone, remember what you were saying the day you found out Rob Smith wasn't coming back. I'm sure you were overjoyed. I recall when we found out Rob Smith would not be returning. That was one thing where, he was a guy Schiano was familiar with. He had done well years before, a decade before, in a different position. I understand 2012 he did well, but he was primarily known to a lot of Rutgers fans as a special team coach. At that point, I think most people knew in 2021 that one of the weakest links, it seemed to be in the coaching staff and with what we were doing, was defensive coordinator. And I recall Rob Smith, hearing that Rob Smith would not be back and being really happy with that. I didn't think that Rob Smith coming back would have been a good move. I thought it was an excellent idea to move on. I was overjoyed that we were moving on. I think it was what Rutgers needed at the time. Obviously, you go out and you get Harris-Simiak, and the rest is history because, aside from the blip last year, we did have a lot of injuries. We kind of started shuffling guys around. We don't have to relive all of that. But aside from that, Joe Harris-Simiak had a really good tenure here. Several players came into the program and then left with good development, grew into their potential, had some really good guys here on the banks during the Harris-Simiak years. And Rob Smith is honestly a name that I didn't think I would be hearing again for defensive coordinator for Rutgers, given how he kind of became a journeyman after leaving Rutgers and Tampa the first time. And then when he came back, it seemed like, the allure had faded. I mean, the allure had passed him by as far as bringing anything great to the table as a Rutgers defensive coordinator. And so hearing that name, and the guys were saying it on some of the other podcasts, it should have maybe been expected, but it's just so odd to go back to a guy you just let walk before your last guy. I mean, and he didn't go out, like it wasn't like he left for greener pastures or some other issue. I mean, he just wasn't effective and things weren't going well. So it's just interesting that that's where we landed. And I don't think there's anybody out there that's going to tell you that they are overjoyed or blown away or impressed with this hire. I think it's safe to say, I mean, this is underwhelming given the time that's passed by, that Schiano had to make a hire. It's underwhelming that of all the people, we're kind of just recycling somebody who was just here and wasn't very effective. After leaving us, he went to Duke, and he joined Mike Elko as a defensive coordinator. He served as an analyst for Texas A&M. He eventually was an analyst for Penn State. I believe that's the last place he was. He is a Pennsylvania native, if I'm correct. And now we bring him in. Now, look, there's been some talk that maybe we were going after guys who wanted to stay in the NFL. Maybe we were going after guys who ultimately, for one reason or another, decided they didn't want to join Rutgers, whether that was money. Not sure. Heatherman obviously was somebody else that I think a lot of people thought we might try to bring in. He wound up being the defensive coordinator for Miami. There were some other rumblings about some other guys in there who, there was speculation about, and they wound up going elsewhere. And so I think it's safe to say that if it's this late in the process and what you're doing is bringing in a co-defensive coordinator with not a ton of experience, coupled with somebody you just had here who nobody expected to return, who was an analyst for Penn State, I mean, wasn't even a position coach at the time, that it's safe to say Coach Schiano probably struck out on a few of his top options for whatever reason. Now, whether that was teams swooping in at the last minute to take guys that we were close to getting. I know there's some rumors out there about that. Or whether that was Schiano limiting his own pool to guys he was familiar with or had New Jersey ties or anything of that sort. Maybe it was a combination of both. Maybe it's the depletion of Rutgers as we have to kind of refill and reload here. I'm not positive, but no matter how you slice it, this had to be, option D, option E, option F. Here's what I'll say, and this is my kind of read on the situation. It might be a bit different from some other people. I don't know that this is really Rob Smith being rehired to run the defense because we were completely out of options. What I'm thinking is this was a place where Schiano was down to very few options, especially guys with adequate experience, guys who he was familiar with and liked as far as a potential and trajectory and philosophical fit. And I think Sparber, Jersey guy, spent some time at Duke as well before James Madison, is regarded, highly regarded as far as a recruiter, is somebody who may be an up-and-comer. Schiano has an eye for talent with young coaches, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And maybe this is a situation where he's not option A because of a lack of experience, but he wants to bring Sparber in, and he wants Sparber to come in and run the defense, and he wants to give him a chance to kind of learn on the job, but he knows that you can't go out and just bring a guy in who has no prior legitimate coaching, play calling experience, is really young, really green, and he knows with a Big Ten team with a tough schedule coming up, but that's loaded with talent in terms of going into the transfer portal, bringing in high school guys, and having a quarterback who's now a senior with a lot of experience under his belt. You can't go out there and just roll the dice on a young guy. And my read is that perhaps he wanted to bring in Sparber, but he knew that he needed some kind of foundation in terms of somebody with experience, somebody he trusts, somebody who can lay a basis and be a mentor type figure to Sparber. And for that reason, he hires Sparber as the co-defensive coordinator. And then he goes out and he brings back Rob Smith as somebody he knew would take the job, he's very familiar with, who's familiar with Rutgers as an institution, familiar with Schiano and what he expects, familiar with how to play call, familiar with how to run and build a defense, even if not really effective. And maybe he brings Rob Smith back to be that foundational guy for Sparber to help really, not so much Sparber learning on the job and Smith running things as 1A, but more so Sparber being the guy that Schiano wants to take the reins and eventually grow into a position like that and, see what the kid has. But you bring in Rob Smith to kind of guide it so he knows it's in good, experienced veteran hands so that there's somebody in the room who's done it before. But really he's looking more to Sparber to be the lightning in the bottle, the spark. And I don't think that's because the first day after Harasimiak leaves, Schiano was sitting there saying, wow, I got to bring in Sparber. I got to bring him in, and I need just somebody to sit with him. I think Sparber was further down the list after certain guys just didn't work out for whatever reason. And once you bring in Sparber, he's not the first choice, but he might be more the choice than Rob Smith in terms of where Schiano wants to go philosophically and in the future. And Rob Smith might have just been the necessary veteran, piece to bring in if you're going to take a gamble on a guy so much younger and less experienced. So I wouldn't jump to conclusions just yet that we are completely just turning backward to Rob Smith. It's completely okay to be underwhelmed by it. I'm underwhelmed by it. I think it's safe to say this wasn't the plan A. I think when you make such a good hire a few years ago with Joe Harasimiak and he goes on to become a head coach, so he moved up, and you make a hire like Kirk Ciarrocca. But let's face it, Kirk Ciarrocca had been at Rutgers in the past too, and I don't believe that most people, when he was hired, were jumping for joy. Now, it's not like he came back in Schiano 2.0, got fired for all intents and purposes again, and then a couple of years later came back. I mean, it was years ago, and he had plenty of time to learn and develop and things. And he had a steady job with Minnesota, and by all accounts was doing well and was going to stick around. As opposed to what we're seeing with Rob Smith. But still, what I'm saying is we've seen Schiano go back into his repertoire, go back into his network, and bring a steady presence with experience into the room before, and it has paid some dividends for Rutgers. So I'm not claiming that Rob Smith is going to pay dividends the way Kirk Ciarrocca is. I understand that, the last few hires we've made have been really kind of something you felt great about and at least good about. And I think people thought we'd have an exciting hire to get behind here. And it doesn't seem like we have an exciting hire to get behind here. But I would say, look at it more as Sparber. Is he a young up-and-coming guy? And Rob Smith is there to be the steady guiding presence. As opposed to, we just went back to Rob Smith and, oh yeah, we brought this other guy in. I think Sparber may be, when it's all said and done in a few years, the main attraction. Now, whether that works out or not has to sink or swim on its own merit, right? It has to sink or swim on its own merit. But I wouldn't rush to act like it's all just Rob Smith coming back. And that's what I would say. Schiano doesn't want to have too much of his hands on the defense, and he's going to delegate like he has been doing. And you just got to hope that, Smith is doing a little better and Sparber brings something, more to the table. So, young guy, hails from Norwood, New Jersey, played his ball at Bergen Catholic. Offensive and defensive line from '08 to 2011. Young guy. Pursued a career in coaching right after that, pretty much. Was a defensive line coach at Stonehill in 2016. He went to his high school alma mater as an offensive line coach. He was hopping around both sides of the ball. Sometimes it's nice to have experience on both sides of the ball. Maybe you could coach defense a little better if you know what they're teaching the guys on offense. He had some serious starters on his high school team, including Brian Felter, who obviously is one of our better linemen now at Rutgers. He bounced around colleges for a while, was at VTech as a graduate assistant, so defensive analyst at Duke. And he was linebackers coach for JMU this past season. And look, they were a pretty good defense, and it's a decent crop, so he's up and coming. He did some stints. He's been going through the kind of college tour to get his feet wet in the coaching profession. He's had some impressive stops. He's got a good reputation as a guy and a recruiter, so it's maybe a little early to hand him the reins to a defensive coordinator job with a Big Ten team, which is why they didn't. But perhaps, out of all the options that were there on the table that Schiano felt had potential and could get something done, Sparber kind of emerged, and then you need somebody to pair him with who you can trust with a veteran presence, because this is Big Ten football, and you can't just put a spring chicken in there. And so he does, puts Rob Smith, and this is what we're rolling with. So, don't expect anybody to be super amped up or excited, but my take is a bit different than some others. I don't think we're just handing the keys back to Rob Smith. I think Rob Smith is there to kind of guide Sparber, who, is going to be the future of this defense if it all works out. I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out, over the next couple of weeks and months. Who was offered the job? Did they say no? Why did they say no? What kind of money was involved? Was anybody bidded on? How much interest was mutual from guys who ultimately passed? Which guys that the names were out there that we thought might come, Schiano never called? All of these things matter. And, it's just going to be curious to see, because it's an interesting situation with football right now, right? Last season, there was a lot of potential, I still think, for the team. And we're going to talk about the transfers, the recruits. We're going to kind of do a whole review of the team and what it's become since the end of the season and what we can expect for the upcoming year. We'll do that, in the coming months. But a lot was there on the table for Rutgers football. They ultimately didn't get where I think they could have gotten. You had the blunder with Illinois. You lost the bowl game after having a big lead. There were some things that, I think Rutgers could have done that they didn't get to do. But the team overall, and I was actually impressed by this, they hit the ground running so well after the season in terms of recruiting in the transfer portal and retaining most of their most, pivotal players that were eligible to stay. So many of them did so far. I'm almost blown away by the good mojo around the program and the trajectory it appears to be on, despite, I think, having a bit of an underwhelming season, all things considered, albeit a respectable one, but not the one that you expected to have. The fact that the trajectory of the program and the vibes around the program and the goodwill around the program seems to be really good. I'm a bit surprised that it looks like Schiano may have struck out several times on the defensive coordinator hire. What does that say one way or the other? Is it just a rough situation given the circumstances this particular offseason? Does it say something about working for Schiano? Does it say something about him just being picky about who he hires? Does it say something about the perception? Or is it just, by chance? Or is Schiano much more comfortable with this Sparber-Smith situation than we give him credit for? Now, I think it'd be silly to say it's his first, second, or even third option per se, but who knows? Who knows who he really wanted to bring in and ultimately couldn't, And who knows at what point he decided to say, well, if I'm going to go this low on the list, I'm just going to take a shot at Sparber and just give me somebody who's comfortable with him being the future, who can bide their time kind of developing and mentoring him. It's going to be interesting if we ever get answers on that. I know it's tight, as always with Schiano, so it's not going to be easy. But I'm curious about it because the mojo was so good around the program the last month or so that it's interesting that this is where we wound up with the defensive coordinator hire. I don't think anybody was expecting it. I think a lot of people thought there would be more of a splash that everybody would be excited about. But hey, the team's doing well as far as personnel is concerned. Some underwhelming stuff last season. The schedule's tough no matter how you slice it this year. So you kind of got to measure your expectations, and you kind of got to lay back and enjoy the show and see what happens. I'm not sitting here saying I'm enthusiastic or I'm super hyped. I'm sitting here telling you I'm just as kind of surprised and just as underwhelmed as you are. This is really weird to just go back so soon to somebody who we were happy to see go so recently, and then a very, very young guy. But let's see how it unfolds before we jump too much to conclusions. And let's see what Schiano is thinking. And then, like I said, we'll pay attention to the reporting to see what's going on. Basketball we'll talk about. I know I missed the last game. I was not in town. Another rough loss at home. The tournament is out of the question at this point unless an absolute miracle happens. And so we see what we're going to do. We'll see if Dylan Harper is going to play again this season. High ankle sprain seems to be the reports. Seems to be in a boot. It's just a disappointing season all around. I don't think you can slice it any other way. I am very disappointed in how the basketball season went. We'll talk more about basketball. Rutgers at home against Illinois, ranked number 23 tomorrow. Illinois, a very talented team. And, it's sad. A lot of these Big Ten programs that we've been going toe-to-toe with and kind of battling over the last several years, they've maintained their stature and they've been formidable, while Rutgers, with maybe its biggest talents in our lifetimes, a guy like my lifetime, because I wasn't around for the 70s, isn't even sniffing that caliber right now. It's disappointing. But it's something we just got to live with at this point, and it's just going to be a disappointing season. I'm kind of anxious to move on and see what we're going to do next year. But, hey, still more games left, still more games to report on, still more games to follow, and you never know what could happen one way or the other. So keep it locked here to Night Watch with Larry K for Rutgers reporting, Rutgers discussion, football and basketball. If you've not done so yet, please hit that subscribe button on your way out. We have been steadily climbing. We are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Once I get the other life stuff out of the way and I, get focused, I'll be back much more frequently like I have been. I got a lot of content, a lot of ideas, some guests, some other things for you guys lined up. So we are working on all those things. We appreciate your support, and let's wish Sparber and Smith the best of luck. Really surprising, really random, but let's hope it works out for our sakes. Lord knows Rutgers fans are due for a positive that's unexpected as opposed to the opposite always happening. So enjoy your night. Watch the Knights. Go to the game tomorrow. Let's see if we can pull off the upset, and we will touch base again very soon. Go RU. Larry K is out.